Hey there, welcome to YouTube. If you are into poetry, if you are into literature, if you are into cultural history, then you've come to the right place. Cardboard Box Productions makes podcasts about all those things, so be sure to click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you never miss a new episode. Obviously, we mostly make podcasts, so you can also go to anywhere you get your podcasts, if it's a place other than YouTube, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and you can subscribe to our podcast feeds there. All right, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to Close Talking, the world's most popular poetry analysis podcast from Cardboard Box Productions Incorporated. I am co-host Jack Rossiter-Munley, and with my good friend Connor McNamara Stratton, we read a poem,
talk about the poem,
and read the poem again.
Before we get into today's selection, a quick note that if you like what we do here at Close Talking and have a spare minute of your time, it would mean the world to us if you would give the podcast a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Those ratings and reviews help boost us up the algorithm and find new listeners.
And if you have suggestions for future episodes or comments on this one, you can send us an email at closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com.
And you can also find us on social media. On Twitter, the show is at Close Talking. I am at Jack Rossiter Munn, and Connor is at Connor M. Stratton. On Instagram, the show is at Close Talking Poetry, and on Facebook, it's facebook.com/closetalking. We also have a website, closetalking.com, where you can find all the past episodes of the show, and Cardboard Box Productions has just launched a newsletter, Unboxed, and if you go to cardboardboxproductionsinc.com, you can subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stuff on Close Talking and all of the other literary and cultural history podcasts that Cardboard Box Productions makes. On with the show.
This is Close Talking.
Welcome to the first episode. I am Jack Rossiter-Munley.
And I'm Connor McNamara Stratton.
Yeah. And together we are bringing you this podcast.
Yeah, and this is, we had recorded 6 episodes in August. Our first one was going to be the poem Urban Renewal by Yousef Komunyakaa, which is a great poem.
To some extent, it is the reason that we are doing this podcast.
Yes. Anyway, we were going to do that one, and then Tuesday, November 8th happened, and it was devastating at a level of magnitude so great that we thought it would be negligent, to use Jack's word, to sort of carry on. So we decided that we would do a slightly different version of the Close Talking podcast that pays closer attention to the election itself and thinks about how poetry is or isn't relevant to these events and state of things.
Yeah. So normally the way the podcast works is we pick a poem, we read it at the beginning and the end of the podcast, and in between, Connor and I just talk about it. We talk about, what it makes us think about or what it makes us feel. We strive through coming together to discuss it for a greater level of understanding. And that is something that applies to literature. I personally feel like I get a lot more out of any given work when I have discussed it with someone. And I'm lucky in Connor to have someone who is brilliant and, in fact, professionally trained at reading literature. The larger idea behind our podcast is that in art, in life, by reaching out and by coming together, we can attain a deeper level of understanding emotionally, intellectually, in light of big events, real big events. I know that Connor and I have both been, in our own ways, thinking through them, feeling through them, struggling with them, but we thought that coming together and talking about them and sharing that conversation with you might in some small way be useful and helpful. And being who we are, we both, I know for sure I was immediately finding literary touchstones in light of the event that helped me contextualize my feelings and start in some small way moving forward.
Yeah, the severity of the situation makes things feel ineffable or inarticulable. That is a word.
It is
clearly
now.
It is now. I clearly did not articulate it. And I do think, for me, poetry in particular is effective at giving me words that, if not sort of capture the situation, give me a foothold or a lily pad in the pond to step on while time passes.
I like that a lot. So Connor and I have both sort of picked out a couple of different quotes or pieces that have spoken to us in some way in the last 48 hours. And I think we're going to each share them and then talk about them a little bit, what they mean to us and just sort of where we're at. So Connor, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I guess first is this quotation. So a good friend of mine sent this along actually earlier today via email. It's a quote from this Tracy Clayton, I think, who is part of the podcast Another Round, which is a great podcast. And I think she was on BuzzFeed News or something, and she said this. And this, I don't know, I really appreciated my friend sending this because I think this, the sentiment was important for me to think about. She said, I am sad, I'm surprised, but I'm also feeling some very surprising feelings too. For one, I feel sort of edified in this moment. It sucks, I'm not happy about it. But I feel like there's this thing that happens in America when white people are reminded that there are racist people in the world and then go, oh my gosh, this is so shocking, I didn't understand. And people of color are like, what did you think we were talking about this entire time? So at least people see who we're living with in America. So there's that. And that felt just right on. I mean, I part of me was shocked, but at the same time, part of me realized that shock is so indebted to all the levels of privilege I have as a white cis straight man.
I want to jump in and quickly note that Connor and I are both white, straight, have advanced degrees, and are the children of white, straight, married parents who also both have advanced degrees. So of people who are scared right now, there is a level of fear in so many people that Connor and I, for a lot of reasons that are basically accidents of birth, it's just not a level that reaches us in the same way. I think we both try to understand it and be the most effective allies that we can, but it's something that is forever alien to us in a very deep way.
Yeah, and the most obvious but basic thing that I realized was, America hates nearly everyone that I love, essentially, or at least a substantial part of America. And
it's clearly the message that's received. Because even if the individual voters themselves don't perceive the vote they're casting as being one for, hatred or for racism, it might be that it's honest economic, feeling. But the message that's received from so many people looking at those results is that, as a friend of mine told me, I was told that half this country hates me and I need to be afraid.
That quotation was a helpful reminder. And from there, there were some pieces that have been speaking to me in various ways. And so I thought I would read them. The first is from Claudia Rankine's Citizen,
which is a beautiful book.
Which is an amazing book. And I mean, I looked to that book for a lot of guidance on both poetics and, how to be a citizen in, American white supremacy. And so there's this excerpt from it. And she talks a lot about microaggressions and the experience of being Black in America, and a lot of other things. This is the excerpt. Not long ago, you are in a room where someone asks the philosopher Judith Butler what makes language hurtful. You can feel everyone lean in. Our very being exposes us to the address of another, she answers. We suffer from the condition of being addressable. Our emotional openness, she adds, is carried by our addressability. Language navigates this. For so long, you thought the ambition of racist language was to denigrate and erase you as a person. After considering Butler's remarks, you begin to understand yourself as rendered hypervisible in the face of such language acts. Language that feels hurtful is intended to exploit all the ways that you are present. Your alertness, your openness, and your desire to engage actually demand your presence. You're looking up, you're talking back, and as insane as it is, saying please. I just think that's a marvelous excerpt, and it resonates in a lot of ways, but I am thinking about this idea of address, and I don't know, something about the election results and Trumpness has to do with that address in terms of it's made it very explicit everywhere, I think, this racism. And I don't know, it's not exactly articulate, but I think, I'm not sure. What do you think of that?
I think that the way the poem is framed, where it starts with her listening and a collective group of people leaning in to listen closer,
mm-hmm.
and then switches to what it's like when she's being talked to,
mm-hmm.
and ends with her trying to speak back and the powerlessness mm-hmm. she feels, or at least the power imbalance she feels mm-hmm. when she is the one doing the speaking,
mm-hmm.
and having to say please for no other reason than because she feels like she has to and has been made to feel like she has to. I think that journey from collective interest to a level of disinterest or erasure or discrediting that is just built in and inherent is a powerful way that she frames that work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and hypervisibility of, I don't know, that seems so central to, I don't know, the way this feels now is the sort of the racism and also the targets of that racism feel especially hyper visible, I think, at the moment, because of this electoral thing, which obviously is political and not specifically linguistic, but at the same time, it's interesting because for now it's like we're in the sort of like discursive moment of Trump being president rather than the material moment because he hasn't yet become president. So it's like that the effects of that are still to come, and are not realized. But what this week has felt is the fact of the proclamation of Trump becoming president has felt like the address, the linguistic address, rather than his sort of, actual role as commander-in-chief.
Yeah.
So
and it's been powerful to watch. And I think that a lot of what this election is about is what can be said, what can't be said, who can say things in what way. Mm-hmm. And the question we're going to be facing is, what can a president say? Because even during this campaign cycle, Trump has said things that no one in contemporary political life, I would say it's been maybe 100 years since people spoke the way he does in electoral politics, and it's almost never been done even that long ago on the presidential scale in the way that he does it. The conversational tick switch that has happened since he was elected has been interesting. I mean, his acceptance speech, he's very good at winning. He knows how to do that. And so he gave a very conciliatory, gracious acceptance speech. He's been fairly sedate every time he's been seen in public since then. We're in a moment of finding out what kind of language space we're going to live in with him going forward. Because we already know the language he's put out there. We already know the language that he's condoned and accepted and used himself, and the language and actions that he's empowered across the country. That's been clear for months. And now the question becomes, does he keep doing that? Is the discursive space of the presidency, which has limited so many people in so many ways for so many years. I mean, Obama, for the first, I'd say 6.5 years of his presidency, was severely limited because of the space he found himself in. There are many things I think he wanted to say, and probably even now wants to say, that he just can't.
Yeah.
Like, things that he wants to say about Donald Trump, but he can't and he won't because of the preservation of that office and the transition of one president to another. And that's a very unique moment we find ourselves in. Just today, when they're touring the White House together, they spent 90 minutes together in the Oval Office.
Oh my God.
And that's largely a result of this unique discursive space of the presidency. That's sort of the last really sacred political space.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jack. So the other one is a short little poem by Lucille Clifton. And I love Lucille Clifton. She's another one of America's greats. She was born in 1936. She passed in 2010. Writes a lot about being in America as a Black woman. And I, just as a side note, have always admired in her style how her language is so close to speech, and has so many elements of the colloquial or the vernacular, yet at the same time is doing a lot of formal things that one might sort of normally only, look for in like a Petrarchan sonnet or something stupid. So I love this poem. When I was at Oberlin my senior year, sort of a lot of anti-Semitic and racist slurs that had been posted and sort of graffitied everywhere. And then there was sighting of someone in a KKK hood, and basically classes were canceled the following day after a lot of pressure from the Africana department and other departments and students. And there was like a march and all this stuff. And one student read this Lucille Clifton poem. It was just one of those moments where the context of the moment and the precision and ferocity of the words are just like so in sync and powerful that it's kind of like chilling to think back to it. So anyway, it stuck with me, and it feels, I'll say more after. It's called Won't You Celebrate With Me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was thinking about this. First, it came to me when I was thinking about that quote earlier about Tracy Clayton saying, people of color are like, what did you think we were talking about this entire time? And I feel like this is one of those instances of etching into that thing that they have been talking about this entire time. This kind of thing of, that end of that, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. I just think it's very moving, and I just think the tone of that end in the rhythm of it is so amazing, remarkable.
That's a hard truth.
Yeah.
And that's a deep personal truth to be putting out. And the poem sets you up for it, but that's devastating. And that's real. I remember the only thing that I've heard that is similar to that is there are a series of interviews with everyday people about what they thought the difference was between being white and being black in America. And this one guy says, I wake up every morning and I think about the fact that I'm black. That's huge. And I remember hearing that for the first time because I've, in the academic sense, questioned my privileges and whiteness, but to have it put that starkly, I do not necessarily wake up every day and think about the fact that I'm white. I just am.
Yeah, for sure not. Yeah. Yeah, and that is like one of the kernels of the Clifton poem, that it's the condition of existence. The amazing part additionally about the poem, this idea of the way it's, won't you celebrate me with me in the beginning, and then at the end it comes in with come celebrate, and the way that the line ends after celebrate, and that imperative to celebration within the condition that she has sort of described her existence to be in, makes the poem resonate on such an intense level. And then the fact, I just love how it's like, come celebrate, line break, with me that every day, line break, something has tried to kill me, line break, and has failed. So every day is obviously emphasized, and then I like, something has tried to kill me happens and exists on its own line. So before and has failed, that could easily have been written with me that every day something has failed to kill me, basically. And the failure would have been sort of undermining the fact that something is trying to kill her. First and foremost, she is perceiving something trying to kill me. Then there is the failure, I think.
It makes the threat and the triumph exponentially greater.
I think that's just a great poem. And then one little thing, there's a poet who I really admire, and actually in one of the future podcasts we'll talk about one of her other poems, but Don Lundy Martin has this book, Discipline. That's a great book, and this is just a little, it's almost like a haiku, but it's kind of in the middle, and I found it very interesting. The eye is more relaxed when it is hunted, which is crazy. But
whoa.
And it's the eye as in not the eyeball, but the capital I. When I read that first, that just sort of startled me. It exists by itself, kind of on the page by itself. And it's this idea of, I think sort of if you were to turn it into an argument or a claim, it's talking about if you are a person being hunted in whatever way, you, like, I think first, it's like, imagine a bear's chasing you. You're being hunted by a bear. You're in total flight mode or something. You don't have the sort of like cognitive self-consciousness that would sort of allow you to be a, moving, thinking I or self. And in that way, that becomes relaxed. If you are totally, not being hunted, comfortable, wherever, that's when the I becomes, more sort of complicated, wrapped in itself or whatever. But of course, she's not talking about being hunted by a bear, but the body under threat of extinction, I think, and the condition of being threatened is the kind of being hunted. And I think that relaxed is such a disturbing but also perfect word, because it's just an obvious tonal disjunction between being hunted and being relaxed.
Right, but that idea that you're less bound into who you might be when you're under threat is so powerful and so true. That could clearly be about her experience, but I think what we saw in the election is a lot of people who feel under threat reacting.
Yeah, and then at the same time, that was sort of my first thought. And my other thought was the movement toward the communal or organization or community that has happened also strikes me as a relaxation of the I, where you're
That's
like,
so good. You're so brilliant. That's great. That's so true.
Don Lundy Martin is brilliant.
Yeah, but I'm floating on the surface and I'm like, oh yeah, a lot of people were pretty pissed off. They were feeling threatened. Like, yeah, everybody knows that. Like, duh, it was on the news. But you're all like, no, guess what the relaxed I really means? Like, it's not I anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's a we or a they or an us. I was thinking about that this week.
That's all beautiful and brilliant and insightful and helpful.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah.
My own literary journey, as it has been, I have several touchstones in my artistic universe, I guess. I'm thinking about looking at like the sky and stars and stuff. I don't know why. I have a certain number of artists, poets, musicians, authors who I tend to return to, whether intentionally or unintentionally, in times of either great emotion, really. It could be happy, it can be sad. Anyone who knows me even a little bit, and dear listeners, whether you've ever met me or not, you're about to get to know both Connor and myself, so best get this going right now. Bruce Springsteen. I don't know if you guys know who Bruce Springsteen is. American singer-songwriter, kind of underground. Not out there.
Jack loves Bruce Springsteen.
I do.
This is one of the first facts of Jack.
It's true. But anyway, so one of the first places I went as I was watching even the election returns, before I was making sense of them, before I was trying to work through them in any intellectual or really intentional way, there's this interview that Bruce Springsteen gave in the 1990s with the gay newspaper, The Advocate. And it was when he had his song Streets of Philadelphia in the movie Philadelphia. And they talked with him about, why he made that decision, because his persona was as this sort of hyper-masculine rock star for the working class. And what he had to say about that was, if my work was about anything, it was about the search for identity, for acceptance, for communion, and for a big country. I've always felt that's why people come to my shows, because they feel that big country in their hearts. And my sort of visceral and immediate reaction to the election was that for one of the most fundamental, it happens, but one of the most fundamental levels of response I had was that I couldn't feel that vision of the country that I try to believe in and work for in my life. And reading what my friends had to say about how the results were affecting them, they were scared and they felt like the country was rejecting them. And I like this country. I think it's pretty great. It's got a lot of problems, but there's a lot to recommend it. And it's scary to me to see so many people feel like they don't have a place here, when the country I believe in is one that tells them that they're beautiful and valuable.
I love that phrase, big country. It's very Bruce. It is about size. The election was demonstrating how big it is. And in that demonstration, me realizing that half of it is not what I have considered to be my big country. That's also to say that it is, of course, this country.
From thinking about that quote on the night to the next morning, what I was trying to think through was the fact that, to me, this world that I was now living in felt impossible and alien. And that the feelings I was having now in 2016 are the exact feelings that millions of people had in 2012 when Barack Obama was reelected. The polls showed a closer race than what the election actually was in 2012. Obama won pretty comfortably, both in the popular vote and the Electoral College. And a lot of people saw a vision of the country that they didn't understand and didn't feel comfortable with, and that did not feel like it was for them. And I had to try and think about that for myself, because no one ever thinks they're part of the problem. I still don't think I am.
I'm for sure part of the problem.
I mean, we all are in our own ways. But trying to square those two competing ideas while still being committed to my beliefs. Trying to have understanding without being toothless in my response and just, this is just sort of how it is now. Trump got elected. On one level, yes, he's elected. He's the president. His success is our country's success, which is what George H.W. Bush famously wrote to Bill Clinton. It doesn't mean I want his policies to become actual law. I don't want him to repeal laws that have allowed for the large-scale social changes of the last 8 years. I'm terrified that he's going to get to appoint a lot of people to the Supreme Court. But at the same time, I would prefer that he not ruin the country forever, or in some deep way, more than he already has, cause problems on the national and global scale. I want him to, govern as well as he possibly can. I want that badly.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And so that's what I was sort of struggling with. And then, of course, figuring out my own place in relationship to that.
Ooh. Yeah, that's intense. I was thinking about Claudia Rankine and Marilyn Robinson came to talk this fall, and I think this is something that Robinson had said. She had talked and said again about why she doesn't like the term spirituality, and it had to do with the fact that you are essentially taking the good vibes that religion offers by being spiritual and sort of denying its whole history, the history of religion or the history of a particular religion or denomination. And she was very adamant that and she's she's a Christian. I'm some kind of, I don't know, I'm rusty on my facts, but she was very adamant that you should remain accountable to the history of the institutions of which you are a part if you're going to take things from it. And so I was thinking about that in terms of America, basically, and that this is, to me, America is founded on anti-Blackness and slavery. Obviously, we knew that, but that to me is the kernel that makes America run and always has, and among other things. And so and I think you can, and many people have done so. Michelle Alexander in The New Jim Crow is one of the great examples of tracing the history of anti-Blackness through slavery, Jim Crow, mass incarceration.
The history of drug laws in this country, or the history of slow emancipation.
Yeah.
As soon as one set of explicitly racist laws goes away, an implicit set sort of springs up seemingly out of nowhere, but all of a sudden, after the civil rights movement, you have much more restrictive drug laws targeting African Americans.
Yeah. And so to me, to be an American is to, I think, have to look that history of what I think is fundamental horror and plunder at its root, and work with that, and see this election as not a new thing, but a manifestation of things that have been boiled into this country since it began, basically.
Yeah, there's a part of Ralph Ellison's book, Invisible Man, which is an incredible book, highly recommended to anyone who's listening, where they talk about the way, and I forget the name of the paint, but it's the whitest paint there is, and it's called something like all white or super bright. And the process of making it, what makes it this incredibly white paint, is that 5 drops of black are added to it. And that, I think, is a very powerful image that contextualizes a lot of what you're talking about, because you don't get whiteness without something to write it against. That isn't something I have been thinking about that in the last couple of days, but it's not one of the major touchstones for me. The other one is another Bruce Springsteen piece, I guess. I can't help it. And this is another one I think of all the time, because in the early 90s, Springsteen was trying to sort of reclaim his image and his message from what had happened to him when he became a superstar in the mid-'80s. In the early 90s, he wanted to sort of take that back, and he wrote this album, The Ghost of Tom Joad, that is almost entirely in the voice of marginal people in the Southwest, a lot of Hispanic voices that he's sort of experiencing and writing in. But the song that he first wrote is the one that kicked off that album, and the one that he felt helped him find a voice, and that was The Ghost of Tom Joad. And the end of that, the title is taken from Tom Joad, who is the main character in The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. And the last verse of the song is his paraphrasing of the speech that Tom Joad gives to his mother at the end of The Grapes of Wrath. I guess I'll read it.
Ooh, yeah, you gotta do it.
Yeah, read it. Well, I don't know. I don't think I can sing it effectively.
Oh. Well, you could sing it.
All right, we'll try it.
Gotta get a little singing.
Let me get this water going.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kidding. Tom said, "Mom, wherever there's a cop beating a guy, wherever a hungry newborn baby cries, where's a fight against the blood and hatred in the air, Look for me, Mom, I'll be there. Wherever there's somebody fighting for a place to stand, for a decent job or a helping hand, wherever somebody's struggling to be free. Look in their eyes, Mom, and you'll see me. I literally get chills every time I listen to that, and I've heard it hundreds of times.
I am not surprised.
And it's not just because I love Bruce Springsteen, but that's such a powerful message of commitment to a certain way of being in the world that sees the value in other people who, for whatever reason, are fighting with everything they have for the very basic elements of life.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think we're going to see a lot of and need a lot of in the next 4 years. And particularly for myself, as a white person, understanding my privilege and trying to mobilize it the best that I can to be an advocate for or a companion with people who are being told right now and could possibly be told in a lot of ways in the years to come that they're not worthy, that they don't matter, that their voice isn't as loud as someone else's because of the color of their skin or who they choose to love, that my position for the next 4 years and all of us is to access that part of ourselves that can resonate with those words, that wherever somebody is struggling for their place in the world, for their piece of life, that we are there to affirm them and help them in whatever way we can.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that's particularly pertinent. I know it speaks to me because I am, in light of the election, thinking about my place as an advocate for people who have less of a voice than I do, or have a voice with less power than mine.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like just thinking about that song, and obviously the repetition of wherever is what sort of brings that home. I love how the song goes down. It's like every line goes down in the notes. I don't know, I feel like that's important somehow. Yeah, interesting in lyrics, thinking about position of lyrics. There's always this tension of, you feel it, like there's always this, like, you have the I voice, and yet it aspires to often be a sort of universal I, right? Or at least a capacious I that can allow many people in. And it does seem like that one in particular is striving towards that capacity.
And from everything I know of what Springsteen's intentions were with the song, that's what he was looking for. And he's very specific to say the ghost of Tom Joad, which is this sort of nebulous concept of commitment to a certain kind of ideal. It's it's the spirit that Tom Joad embodies in the book is one that he himself is trying to take on in the album that follows. It's the first song on the album. And it's one that I think he's encouraging listeners to access within themselves. The implied message that I have always taken from that song is that the ghost of Tom Joad lives in every one of us. We have to find it and give it voice. That's our obligation.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's cool. It's like, so song and poetry they're like so close in a lot of ways. And yet one way that I think about the difference in their effects is this relationship between the voice's individual I and its potential aspiration or whatever towards something larger. I feel like songs much more easily feel larger than the self, just in terms of you can sing along, basically. And like once you sing along, then you are the singer, you are the performer, and it's coming from you. And so when you say me in that song, suddenly the ghost of Tom Joad is in you. Whereas poetry, and I think especially now, is so fixed on the page, but also is less catchy in a lot of ways, that it is not sort of re-performed by the reader, and that prevents its I from being larger, I think.
I think there's a stronger sense of communal authorship in music. It's easier to take ownership of a song. People don't pull out a poem and they're like, oh yeah, that's my poem, when it's one that someone else wrote. Whereas if a song comes on and that's the song that gets you grooving, you're like, oh yeah, that's my jam.
That's my song.
That feels like it's your song.
That song is me. Yeah.
Right. Like, oh my God.
And that's interesting. Obviously, I think instinctually that distinction sounds like an argument for music over poetry or something, because the communal is so appealing, and in particular, given the, this week, that seems to be what a lot of people in a lot of different places are going for, is some sort of sense of community against, what has happened, to resist, to fight back, to do something positive change. Yet at the same time, there is, to me, something remarkable in reading poetry that is such an encounter with difference, or such an encounter with the other, and a poem in its removedness from me has something else to offer. And I think that's equally important, especially thinking about positions, thinking about our positions, but also just all the different positions that people have in America and blah, blah, blah.
America and blah, blah, blah.
America and blah, blah, blah. That, it's important to have community, but it's also important to recognize sort of fundamental difference and encounter that and look that in the eye and live sort of alongside it or with it, but not in a way that presumes that, we're all one and the same and a happy family or whatever.
Right. That might be an aspirational goal in some fashion. But even at that point, hopefully you're recognizing difference, but finding value in it.
Yeah.
It's not that you don't see difference anymore. We're not talking about some colorblind nonsense. Encountering difference, and hopefully the leap that's made is then acknowledging it and giving it value.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, what has spoken to me most since the election is a poem. And that's exactly the message it has.
What is it? What is it?
Oh, it's gonna make me tell.
Jack, what's a poem? Jack, we need a poem.
Again, I'm searching for a real deep cut here from little-known alt poet Mary Oliver.
Oh my God.
And her least known work. Just kidding. So this is Mary Oliver, probably her best known poem, but it just happened to come across my consciousness yesterday evening through total happenstance. And I'm not going to read the whole poem, even though it's a beautiful poem, but the last two lines of it, let me make sure I don't fuck them up. But the last two lines of the poem are, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" And that hit me really hard for a couple of reasons. Primarily because it's directed at me, and I had spent the day uncertain and questioning and searching for what do I do. how do I understand this? How do I move forward? As Connor knows, up there with Bruce Springsteen, something to know about me is that I can list the presidents of the United States in order. I learned how to do that when I was 6, and it's real. Back then, it ended at Clinton.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there have been names added to it during the time that I've known the list. And on a silly and personal note, one of the big things that I took away from this election was having to understand that this guy's name was forever on that list that I'm going to know probably for the rest of my life. And only today did I actually go through and say all the presidents' names in order, including his, just to test it out. But this question, tell me, what is it you plan to do, which is the first line, is really a fundamental question. Like, what is it I'm going to do? How am I going to feel okay? And where's the work? Because I want to do the good work. I want to find people and causes I believe in and help empower them and feel them empower me. And really try and be positive and affirmative about my beliefs moving forward after what I take as, in large ways, a repudiation of a lot of the things that I believe and value. And then the second part, with your one wild and precious life. And after an election night, that to me was affirming a man with a reductive view of which lives are precious and valuable, and that I saw from what many of my friends who are LGBTQ or Hispanic or Muslim or any number of the different identities that he has attacked or empowered attacks against, they're afraid and they don't feel like he or the country finds their lives to be precious. That affirmation of someone's life being wild and precious, whoever they are, was so important to me. And the combination of what are you going to do, you valuable, beautiful, exceptional person with the power to make change. That's how I took the quote. Those two concepts put together were exactly what I needed. And I went from being really upset to having just a little bit of understanding of where to go forward. So that's my Mary Oliver quote.
Yeah, that's a good one. Mary Oliver, she's the big hitter. She's like Coldplay of poetry or something. Not a great reference, but she's a big deal. But that aside, poetry biz aside, no, I love that quote. I love, well, you said, I mean, wild and precious, such a perfect pair of words. I mean, how are you gonna put life in two adjectives that feel somehow, comprehensive yet not reductive? And I think that's, it's hard to think of two better ones. It was interesting. You almost forgot the one, and I was like, no, that one is very important. It's like this is the shit. This is the thing.
This is it. This is your chance.
Yeah, and I like tell me. It's interesting because it's. Yeah, so obviously, as you talked about, it's an address to you, but it's different than, this will become apparent, but one way that I work through meanings of small phrases is just imagining if they had been written otherwise. I feel like I find myself doing that. So if tell me hadn't been there and it's just what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life, that to me is interesting, and it addresses the reader, but at the same time, it allows for more sort of emotional ambiguity. It's like, well, I don't know if this is like a challenge or like, are you going to do anything? And then, so I feel like tell me clarifies the intimacy of the moment. I feel like this is a speaker in the poem who wants to know what you want to do. It's like,
and it makes it so much more directed.
yeah,
I mean, when I heard the quote, it
Yeah.
was immediately coming at me,
yeah,
and it threw me back on myself, and
Yeah.
it really demanded reflection.
yeah,
And it also, I think, the including the you plan.
hmm
It's not tell me what you will do. It's tell me what you will plan to do. Figure it out.
yeah,
Have a plan. Your life is wild and precious. It's an untamable, uncontainable, brilliant explosion of humanity. You've got to figure out how to harness that power. What do you
Yeah.
plan to do with it? You could do anything. It's crazy. You're a living, breathing human being. That's amazing.
yeah,
What are you going to do with that is not enough of a question. You have to plan it.
yeah. I love that. I know that would definitely resonate, in particular with you. You're
I'm also a
planning-
planner.
You're a planner.
That's true.
I'm a bit of a planner as well.
I think even beyond that, I think that,
Yeah.
as I was saying, like the idea
Yeah,
that life is so big and wild and the finiteness, it's your one life,
yeah.
means that you have to figure something out about what you're going to do with it.
Mary Oliver for the win.
I know. She is, again, you see, Connor has like the really excellent deeper cuts. And I got Bruce Springsteen.
No, Bruce Springsteen is great. Everyone's invited to the party.
It's true.
I mean, that's the beauty of languages. You obviously want the new words. You want the poems from the poets who not many people have read, who are on the underground, but you also want to re-examine the common language that is part of the fabric of our societal hubbub. Being able to reread that within new contexts, new situations is equally vital.
Absolutely agreed. And I think something that we both believe very strongly is that at times like these, there is great value in art of all kinds.
Yeah.
And what art does is speak to essential truths about people.
Yeah.
Intellectually, emotionally, physically, communally, individually. Art is made by human beings who are deeply interested in examining life and all that it contains, and that at moments like this, it's a great opportunity to engage with that and let it help our own examination of a moment that in many ways feels unknowable right now.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree. That reminds me of another quote. Maybe probably the last quote.
I think this will be the final word.
But there was an interview with Tehu Cole, who's a novelist and essay writer. He wrote Open City and writes a lot of essays for The New Yorker and everywhere, basically. But a colleague had posted this interview on Lit Hub. Tehu Cole reminds us of life beyond politics and the beauty of art. That's where it's from. It's with him and Adam Fitzgerald, and he says, and he talks a lot about sort of art in the context of this political moment. It's very recent. But let me make my own personal argument in defense of making art. I don't even know who fashioned this particular phrase or idea. There's this idea that we do war so that our children will do commerce, so that their children will be poets. Well, Adam, I'm not doing war, and I'm not going to waste my life with commerce. Whether or not it's financially viable for me, I want my goal of civilization to be as follows: to do the work, to pay attention to what's beautiful, and to encourage others in that form of attention as well. That's where I want to be.
Beautiful.
I like that.
I like that too. I think that's a great place for us to wrap up.
Thanks to you, Cole.
Yeah. This has been the first episode of Close Talking and also a supersized episode of Close Talking. Normally, we look at one poem, and it's about half an hour total. In light of the election, as we said at the top of the show, Connor and I wanted to take some time to reflect on it together and to look at what literary touchstones we had come across that were helping us as we figured out our own way through the feelings and thoughts that we've been having as a result of the events of Tuesday night. So thank you all for listening. If you want to, you can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/closetalking. You can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/closetalking. By doing that, you will get the latest updates about all Close Talking happenings, and you will hear all about what Connor and I are doing, all of the cool stuff we get up to between shows. And if you have anything that you want to say, anything you want to share about poems or songs or pieces of visual art that have meant something to you in the last couple days, feel free to send us an email at closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com.
Critiques of our ideas.
Yeah. If you've got something to say about what we've been saying, we would love to hear it. Indeed.
Go in.
Do it. We want to hear from you. Close Talking is about Connor and I talking about poems, but we want to talk with you too. We want to hear what you have to say. So if you can, drop us a line, closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com. Thanks for a great conversation, Connor. This has been beautiful.
Thanks, Jack. Good man.